Well, the Locked On Top 100 list is out, and apparently Iowa quarterback Mark Gronowski doesn't exist. Today we're talking about why Gronowski's snub isn't just wrong, it's ridiculous.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, your daily Iowa Hawkeye podcast. I've been covering the Hawkeyes for over 20 years on the radio, including currently on the Iowa Sports Radio Network, where you can hear me each weekday from noon to 2, talking the world of sports and a lot of Hawkeyes. We have stations in Des Moines, Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, the Quad Cities, and Sioux City, all across the Iowa Sports Radio Network. A busy one today. We got a lot of numbers to throw your way as we're talking Iowa football. We're going to take a look at some defensive numbers. We're going to play over-under today, taking a look at numbers that are not available in the real world of betting, but if you're hanging out at the Condon Casino, you can play along with these numbers, and we're going to have some fun with that. We're going to take a look at the defense. Also going to take a deep dive into the offense. What are some numbers that should be realistic that Iowa should be shooting for, and some of the individual players, including Kamari Moulton, Jacob Gill, the quarterback position with Addison Estring, and a whole lot more, including Mark Gronowski. Our conversation begins today, in fact, with Mark Gronowski, the Hawkeye quarterback, after our Locked On Top 100 list has come out. And we talked about this earlier in the week. You everydayers know we touched on this a little bit, as 2 Iowa Hawkeye players did reach top 100 status in the way that we went about the voting. So the 2 players that were in there, Logan Jones checks in at number 82, the Iowa offensive lineman, the center, number 82 in the top 100 list. And then you have Jennings Dunker, who comes in at 98. So 2 Hawkeyes are listed there. 2 guys that are incredibly deserving, obviously, on top of it. All-American honors, preseason pub, all over the place for both of those guys. 2 guys that absolutely would have been draft picks when we're talking about the NFL draft. You know, we've talked about Bruce Feldman's freaks list and Logan Jones showing up on that once again this season. With his athleticism, his ability, his speed, all the things coupled with obviously the size that he has at the center position. He's not Tyler Linderbaum, but he's pretty darn good. And I was happy to get him back for another season. And the same thing for Jennings Dunker. And Jennings Dunker is not going to be a left tackle. He's not a left tackle for Iowa, but he is a dang good right tackle. And as we've learned, I think more and more over these last 10, 15 years in the NFL, you know, for years and years, it was, if you're not a left tackle, you're not going to be taken early. And that has changed, and that's evolved. You know, when we go back to when Brandon Sheriff was selected out of the University of Iowa, and when he went in the first round, the first 10 picks, a lot of people wondered, you know, could he make that transition? Well, he became an interior guy, and a dang good one at that. And when you're an all-pro, you can live at that level. Marshall Yanda, another example at the right tackle position. That's Jennings Dunker. Jennings Dunker is a right tackle, and that's okay, because if you have one of the best, if not the best, right tackle and one of the best centers in the country, you're going to be off to a pretty good start, certainly, on that front. So back to the topic at hand, and that is back to the quarterback position and Mark Gronowski. So when I was compiling my list, look, you don't want to go all homer, right? It would be very easy for all of our hosts on Locked On just to put a bunch of their guys in there, maybe put a bunch of guys from their conference in there. And that was just the way that your selection process was going to go. And I didn't. I tried to go as real as it was. Now, as I also mentioned, it's a difficult exercise. You know, understanding and reason that I was actually kind of surprised that both Logan Jones and Jennings Dunker showed up on this list at 82 and 98 is because it's hard to know, those offensive linemen and how they rate and how you stack them up compared to a quarterback, compared to a running back, a rush edge, whatever it is. It's a difficult list to compile. And certainly at the collegiate level, I think it makes it even more difficult. But we come back to Mark Gronowski, who was on my list. And he was on my list towards the back end of it, admittedly. But it also goes into conversation. And if you watched our squad show this week, I was involved with the Big Ten group. And we were going through and we were talking about the passing yardage leaders. Now, look, Mark Gronowski is not going to lead the Big Ten in passing yards this year. We'll talk about maybe a realistic number for him coming up a little bit later. But with Mark Gronowski, he's not going to throw for 3,500 yards. Probably not going to throw for 3,000. Then, in fact, if he hits 2,500 yards, we're going to be pretty happy. That's normally unless Iowa runs the table, goes 11-1, not going to put him in consideration for an MVP. But I do also believe that people are sleeping on him as a quarterback. And we've talked earlier about the running ability and how that yesterday is something that has been maybe undervalued when it pertains to Mark Gronowski. But hearing just how it wasn't divisive, but dismissive. That's the word I was looking for. Dismissive. The rest of the Big Ten hosts here on Locked On were about Gronowski. I was surprised. I found another thing, and this was a couple weeks ago over at The Athletic, and they broke down all the starting quarterbacks, at least projected starting quarterbacks, from 1 through 136. They got Cade Klubnik at the top, Garrett Nussmeier, no thanks, at number 2, Lenora Sellers, love that dude, John Mateer at number 4. I mean, that's incredibly high. But you had to scroll quite a ways before you got all the way down at number 39 for Mark Gronowski. Gronowski, I believe, is going to certainly beat that mark this season if healthy. I think he's going to have a great season. I think him and Tim Lester are a perfect match and a marriage of what they're trying to do. Now, we've also heard he's been a little bit rusty at times here during opening camp, and you'd anticipate that. Didn't get to go through fall camp. Completion percentage got to be better than it was a year ago. He was banged up a year ago, was dealing with that shoulder injury while he was playing last season at South Dakota State. From that same article from The Athletic, this is from a scout, said with a solid build and NFL caliber arm talent, Gronowski is a proven winner with back-to-back national championships as a 4-year starter and Walter Payton Award honoree at South Dakota State. Gronowski would have been drafted last year had he declared, but he's hoping a big year in the Big Ten will boost his stock. So that comes from The Athletic. It's Iowa. It's the perception. It's the understanding. It's just what people, when they think of Iowa offense, and that's another crazy part about this, as I was going through and just how just awful things have been recently, how ugly this has been, that people forget quarterbacks have done a good job. Quarterbacks have done things here. And I think we're so broken. I mean, you go back to Nate Stanley. 5 times in Nate Stanley's career, he went over 300 yards passing. With Spencer Petras, as awful as he was, he had games where he threw for 246 against Michigan, 259 against Maryland in that Friday night victory. His first start of his career, he threw for 265. Cade McNamara, there wasn't much there. In fact, Cade McNamara never threw for over 200 yards against an FBS team. He had 251 against Illinois State in the opener last year. In his Iowa career, though, never went over 200. Maybe our brains are broken, and I'm sure people outside of Iowa, brains are broken when they're thinking about Iowa football. And that's, I'm sure, where some of the divisiveness comes from. Is it a snub? Is it going to be motivation? We'll see. What I know is Mark Gronowski is the leader that Iowa needs right now. He is the guy that can elevate this offense, that can get the passing game going. And as you saw the highlight, I'm sure, if you're on social media, that was going around from practice today. And it was Reese Vanderzee just out there making plays, looking like a dude. So yesterday's episode was all about that, right? About making plays, about what we're seeing in these short little clips and overreacting to it. And you saw Reese Vanderzee get behind the defense a couple of different times, making big plays. Mark Gronowski making absolute beautiful throws. Now, we don't know in the practice of Mark Gronowski was 270, and those were the 2 completions, right? But not just completing passes. And the pass completion we saw the day before on the video clip on the sideline with him rolling out to his right and finding Weechin. Here finding Vanderzee. And you start to get excited. I get it. I bought things hook, line, and sinker a year ago. I thought last year was going to be the year. I thought last year was a breakthrough season that I was going to get there with all that returning talent defensively, and Cade McNamara was going to be fixed. I was dead wrong. The offense did make improvements, and those improvements came from the rushing game. Mark Gronowski, the time is now. Can he take that step? That's what we're going to see here in just a couple of short weeks. We're going to talk about the numbers involved. How many passing yards for Mark Gronowski this year? How about Kamari Moulton? What's he going to do? How about that offensive line? We got even a prop bet up for you on that front. We're going to talk about some Hawkeye football over-unders, not just win total. No, we're going to talk a little bit deeper. We're going to talk about individual players. Now, these are not available for you on FanDuel. These are just ones that I made up that give us a little talking point. We're going to have some fun with those and mark them down. See what you can do. Over-unders for the Hawkeyes when we continue on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You've already been following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups. I love playing baseball. The app keeps it fresh. New daily promotions and fun ways to bet. Not just who's going to win the game or betting against my Minnesota Twins. No, there's a whole lot more on there, from home run props, no run, yes, no, first inning, and a whole lot more. FanDuel has you covered. Are you new to FanDuel? New customers can bet just $5. You're going to get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's right. New customers bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel.com. Trent Condon back with you once again on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for being with us and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We are your daily podcast every single day during the week, talking Hawkeyes with you. Big weekend coming up, obviously. On Friday, it will be Iowa Football Media Day. Looking forward to that. Then on Saturday, the open practice. And then the following Monday of next week, we will get to hear from the Big Ten Network as they continue their wraparound coverage of all the 18 teams in the Big Ten. And we will hear from them a little bit later on. So we got some over-unders here that we're going to play around with. And these are just numbers that I put together. Like I mentioned, these are not available at FanDuel. You can't find these, other places or even far away places. These are just numbers that I compiled that I think go hand in hand with where at least my baseline is of expectations. And if I was running casino, remember, I'm looking for mostly a 50-50 split. I'll take a stand if need be, but if I get 50% of the money on one side of the prop, 50% on the other, I just scoop up that 10% rake. You guys can deal with the middle, and I will be a winner. That's why running a sports book is pretty good work. That aside, let's get back into it. Mark Gronowski, as we talked about Gronowski a ton, and we're going to talk about him because it's the most important position in sport. It is the key. And I got a couple for you. I'm going to start here with, and I was interested to see where I was going to end with this number, 2,450 yards, passing yards on the season. Basically 200 yards a game, a touch over that. And we'll just say this is for the regular season. Yeah, you can throw the bowl game if Iowa makes a run, blah, blah, blah. Let's just say regular season. Can he average 200 passing yards a game? Now, to get into the top 10 for a single season, he'd have to get up to 2,800. Number 10 on the list, 2015 CJ Beathard with 2,809 yards. So that's what we're looking at in terms of getting up there. This is still going to be 400 yards short, even if you would get to that mark. And I do. Now, I think you all know that I'm a believer. The next one, though, might be a little bit more tricky. 21 and a half passing touchdowns on the year. Over or under? What do you got here? This is one that is going to go with a couple of different things. And we've talked about the offensive line. When it's not right, when you're missing a piece, how ugly it can get. And with this offensive line, you feel great at center. You feel great at right tackle. You feel good at left guard with Bo Stevens in his 21 career starts. And Kate Pieper was the number 6 lineman a year ago. So that makes you all feel pretty good overall. However, what if left tackle doesn't hit? What if it's a revolving door all year long? Or you find a guy and something happens, an injury happens, whatever it is. And that continues to be the concern. 21 and a half passing touchdowns. I'm going to go under this mark. The next one, though, and the final prop we got for Mark Gronowski is 4.5 rushing touchdowns. I'm going way over on this. In fact, I think he could be talking about 8, 9, 10 rushing touchdowns this season. We mentioned on yesterday's show, rushing for Mark Gronowski has been undervalued, underserved, under-talked about. This dude is not just a physical runner. He's got some juice to him, too. Over 4.5 rushing touchdowns for Mark Gronowski. We're going to go over on that prop. We got more props as well. Let's get over to, speaking of running the football, let's get to the running back position next. All right, so props for the running back position. It's going to look a little bit different, right? And no Caleb Johnson this year. Let's start with Kamari Moulton. Moulton, a year ago, we know he was going to be the starter. And he was the starter in game number 1. And then Caleb Johnson took over. And took over in a big-time way. Still, even with that, Kamari Moulton had a very successful year a year ago. But there was so much buzz about him last August. And it's there again. They just love him. And his best football still in front of him. Still learning the position. So, very simply, does he get to 1,000 yards this season? 1,500. Got to put that half on there for everything when you're talking about over-unders. Does he get over 1,000 yards this year? I say yes. Now, the other part is going the other direction. 9.5 touchdowns. A year ago, Caleb Johnson, he surpassed that total pretty easily. Last season, 21 rushing touchdowns. Also added 2 in the air. 23 combined touchdowns a season ago. Not going to hit those marks. But even going over that 9.5 would mean double digits for Kamari Moulton. And I can't quite get there. Reason, I think this is going to be more of a timeshare than what we saw a season ago. I think they're going to use a lot of Terrell Washington Jr. We know Jazzy Patterson, how physical of a runner Jazz Patterson is. And I think that's also going to be a component where he's going to become maybe not a goal line back, but you're going to see him more when they get inside the red zone. And then you talk about the other guys with Brevin Dahl, Xavier Williams, 2 redshirt freshmen, even Nathan McNeil, the true freshman that continues to get a lot of talk. I think because of that, I'm going to go under with Kamari Moulton. Here's another one for you. I mentioned Jazz Patterson last year. He had 63 carries a season ago. Averaged 4.9 yards per carry, had a couple of touchdowns, 309 on the ground. Over under 63.5 carries for Jazzy Patterson this season. And I went under. And I went under because I believe in Kamari Moulton. I believe what we're hearing about Terrell Washington Jr. is real, and he's going to have a real chance. And certainly, as more of that third down back, we're going to see a lot of TJ out there in that fashion. And then the 3 other young guys that I mentioned, with Dahl, with Williams, and with McNeil, that all those guys at least are going to see some carries this year. So I don't think there's going to be a ton available for Jazzy Patterson. Now, we've heard great things about Patterson, what he's done. It's the old adage, right? Best shape of their life, that kind of thing that is there. But that's one of the unders that I'm going to take in this exercise. Let's go next to the pass catchers. And very simply, will any Iowa wide receiver have over 45 catches this year? What would you take? Yes, no on that prop. Over 45. Last year, Jacob Gill led the team with 35. Look, if Iowa doesn't have a wide receiver this year that gets over 45, unless all 7-8 guys that we've talked about all are in like the 25 to 35 range, I think it's going to be a problem. And also, I think you want somebody maybe other than Jacob Gill leading your team in receptions this year. It's not a knock on Jacob Gill. It's just I think we've seen what he is. There is a certain ceiling to the game of Jacob Gill. Good, solid, dependable, everything that you want. But game breaker, speed to burn, guy that can blow the top off. If all of a sudden you're talking about Reese Vanderzee leading your team in receptions, or finally healthy Seth Anderson, or on and on and on, and we can play this game with all the wide receivers, I think that's going to be a good thing for Iowa football. How about this one? Reese Vanderzee, over under 5.5 touchdown catches this season. Now, he had 2 in his first game of his career against Illinois State. He had 2 in the highlight that we saw today on social media from Iowa football. He had 3 all of last season. He was injured. He was banged up. Maybe I put this number too low. 5.5. Maybe this is a free one for you out there, and take the over with Reese Vanderzee touchdowns. He's going to get 6 or more this year, right? Maybe I'm talking it into existence. Let's go to next, the tight end position. And I want to go to Addison Ostrenga. So Zach Ortworth, he's going to continue to be that down the field guy when they go to tight end, which isn't a ton. Certainly less than it was under the previous offensive coordinator. Still, last year, Luke Lachey had 28 receptions. Addison Ostrenga last year had 15. Can he double that? 30.5 catches this year for Addison Estringa. I think that better be over. And if it's not, and it's not because there's injuries and those kind of things, but if we see a healthy tight end group this year and Addison Estringa struggles to get over 30 catches this season, I think then we know that the tight end position is going to look different under Tim Lester. You're number one. You don't want to make these grandiose statements that this is the way that it's always going to be, right? You don't want to do that. And you don't want to do that certainly with the position as important as wide receiver is at Iowa. We'll see this year, 30.5 the number. Let's hope that one goes under. And one final prop bet for you on the offensive side of the football. When we're talking about player, this is more a position group. The number of starters at the left tackle position. So I put the number at 1.5. As we know, there are 3 guys vying for it. And in a perfect world, you would have one guy that takes the job game 1 against Albany, and he starts all the way through the year. And there's no injuries, and he plays at a high level, and there's no concerns. And whoever the backups are, maybe you'll see some time down the road, and they can be backups in other spots. But your hope is that this stays under the 1.5. The smart money, though, is on the over. It's on the over because it's a position that doesn't have experience at this level. Trevor Laut has barely played. Same with Jack Dotzler. And though Bryce George has played a ton, he was in the D2 ranks at Ferris State. And now he's making the jump up into the Big Ten. You know, they went to the portal a couple of years ago, got an offensive lineman from the D2 level. He was banged up and it never happened. And I think there were expectations that it were. And I think that's lingering certainly in the back of my mind of how this is going to look. Smart money's on the over. Let's hope that it's wrong, though, and it's under at left tackle. And whoever wins that job takes it running. And that is that. We got more over-unders coming your way. Let's go over to the defensive side of the football. Number of tackles for the middle linebacker for Iowa this year. How about interceptions for Xavier Nwankpa? We're continuing our over-unders as we continue. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. Trent Condon back with you one final time. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. Thanks for being with us and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Up first is the defense, and particularly the defensive line. Let's get into some sack numbers. Let's start with the 3 guys on the outside. Ethan Hurkett, who a year ago, a little bit of a surprise to me when going through these numbers from last season, he was one of the top guys getting the quarterback. In fact, led the team with 6.5 sacks last season. Also led the team with 12 tackles for a loss last year. So we're just bumping it up 1 up to 7.5. And I think, well, on paper, that one seems pretty easy that he's going to be able to hit that mark. How about Max Llewellyn? And love what we saw, and certainly the emergence out of Llewellyn last season. He had a lot of phone calls, a lot of people that were trying to get Max Llewellyn to make his way south. And he decided to stay in Iowa City. Llewellyn, though, had 5.5 sacks a year ago. Now it's becoming a full-time guy out there. We're going to bump that number up to 7.5 for his over-under in the sack total. The number 3 defensive end coming off injury is Brian Allen. And I put his number at 6.5. He had 3 last year. I think he's going to get a ton more playing time this year. We'll see where he is health-wise, working his way back. I think every day, as you guys know, I love me some Brian Allen. Now it's just about doing those little things for him. How about in the middle with Aaron Graves? And a quick note, Gary Dolphin on his podcast yesterday had a bunch of interviews, and in it, including one with Kirk Ferentz, mentioned that Jeremiah Pittman is going to be out a little bit longer as he had surgery and still going to be out a little bit while there in that defensive tackle room. Good thing they went out and got a couple with Pace and Hawthorne because they're going to need both those guys in the middle. But of course, they do have Aaron Graves. So I put his number up to 10.5, not sacks, because that's incredibly difficult. He had 6 last year at the defensive tackle position, but I put it in terms of tackles for a loss. 10.5 tackles for a loss, the over-under for Aaron Graves. Up next, the biggest question mark on this team, certainly defensively, is at linebacker. Jaden Harrell, Carson Shire, the 2 guys that we've heard about the most. I put their tackle numbers at 88.5 for both of those guys, over-under. Speaking of the Jadens and the middle linebacker spot, last couple of conversations I've had, and it's not any kind of knock on Jaden Harrell, just told me not to sleep on Montgomery. Something to keep an eye on in the middle. And finally, we go to the defensive backfield. Xavier Nwankpa making the move over to free safety this year. 2.5 over under in terms of interceptions. Has to happen now. Last chance for Nwankpa to put together a great senior year, benched at times a year ago. It was a frustrating season. Now it's time to put it all together, make it all work, and we've seen that happen plenty of times before. TJ Hall looks like it is happening for him, going back to the spring and the spring that he had. I had this number for TJ Hall this year. 7.5 passes defended, pass breakups. Last year, the team leader in that statistical category was Jamari Harris. He had 7. Nick Jackson also had 7 last year out at the outside linebacker spot. Jay Higgins had 5. But when we're talking about cornerbacks, 7 last year for Jamari Harris. Can he get over 7.5 this season for TJ Hall? And then we wrap up with the special teamers. Reese Dakin averaged over 44 yards per punt a year ago. Can he build on that? Get over that number? Because that's a good number already. We're talking about Iowa punters. And then Drew Stevens, we're just going to take the number he had last year. Hit 87% of his field goals last year. I'm going over. I think it's going to be an even better season after a tremendous bounce back last year from Drew Stevens, hitting 20 of 23 field goals. And I think he goes even higher this season. So there it is, our over-unders for Iowa football. These are, again, just for fun. You cannot bet these anywhere. The kind of casino is not a real place, but a way to look at it, a way to see exactly if my mind is kind of going with your mind. Make sure to hit us up on the comment section if you're watching us on YouTube, or if you're on the podcast side of things, listening audio only version, you can hit me up at Trent Condon is where you can find me, or at Locked On Iowa is where our social media accounts are, and you can find us that way. Make sure you're hitting subscribe. We're trying to get to 5,000 subscribers here on YouTube before we get to football season. Just takes a moment and really does help us immensely. Same thing on the podcast side. 5-star reviews really does help. We're with you each and every day, Locked On Hawkeyes, throughout the course of the week. And that's not all. We got you covered with a whole bunch more here across the Locked On network. For your second listen, make sure you check out the Portal Show. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. You can be the most informed fan on the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find the Portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We also got Locked On Big Ten, Locked On for your favorite NFL team, MLB team, you name it. We got it all under the Locked On umbrella, and glad to have you with us here on Locked On Hawkeyes. That'll do it for today. Back at it tomorrow. Thanks for joining us as always. Until then, go Hawks.